In this podcast, we will discuss the concept of Fana. Now, what is Fana, you might ask? If you are familiar with Sufism and the concept of Fana in it, you would know that it's the highest expression of love. Literally speaking, it translates to extinction. So, how can extinction be an expression of love? Well, as it happens with most Sufi terms, the devil is in the detail, or in this case, the beauty is in the nuances. The extinction in this case means destroying the self while remaining physically alive. The idea here is that once you destroy the self, the false self, the ego, the boundaries diminish, and what remains is the ultimate union with the God. Let's try to understand it a little further, and we'll understand it through the lens of the works of medieval Muslim scholar and philosopher Ghazali. His views on Fana can be interpreted through his books Ihya and Mishkat. And through these books, I will try to explain what he meant by Fana, or what many of the Sufis mean by this term, and how they meditate upon this idea. So, first of all, in Ihya, Al-Ghazali presents a kind of mysticism which aims at purifying the soul. He believes that there are different stages leading one to the ultimate goal, and the ultimate goal is the union with the God. And step by step, he leads you to that ultimate union. So he explains very interestingly 3 levels of trust. In first level, he says that Sufis delegate all authority to God and let him be their deputy and represent them in all the things. In the second level, he says the Sufi depends on God as a child fully trusts and relies on his mother. And the third and the highest stage of trust is to submit fully oneself to the will of God, as the dead body submits to those who wash it before the funeral. And Al-Ghazali himself admits that the second and third levels are really, really rare and difficult. But still we must strive for it. In his book Mishkat, he once again explains this idea of Fana, and he draws parallel with the theory of metaphysics of light. He meditates on the motif of light, and through that he explains the mystical experience of God. So he says there are 2 kinds of lights. One is the sensible light, normally what we see around us. It shines upon objects and then we see those objects. And the second is the more spiritual kind of light, which shines upon the unseen world. And in parallel to these 2 lights, he says there are 2 kinds of eyes. One is the outward eye and one is the inward eye. With one, you look at the outside world, and with the other, you turn to your soul and see it. So, when he talks about Fana and the destruction of the self, he says that once that happens, then Sufi experiences God as the only existent one, and everything else disappears. He points at this union with the God, but at the same time he's not saying that the Sufi is becoming one with the God, because he's not equal to God. They two remain separate. So this idea of dualism, it remains in his work. Now, coming to the Sufi meditation on this idea, let's just practice it. First of all, we must understand that Sufi tradition of meditation, it differs from, let's say, Buddhism, where you can find secular or atheistic versions. But in Sufi meditation, it will remain theistic. The idea of God is part of the DNA. The core of all its practices is to remember God, fill your heart with God, and unite yourself with Him. So I'm going to briefly mention 3 forms of meditations which you can practice and you can experience that union that Sufis are talking about. The first is the type of meditation that Ghazali mentions. It's very closely related to the mindfulness that we talk about these days. The idea is to meditate on the wonders of God's creation. So, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, simply breathe and relax and look at the world around. Just marvel at its beauty. You don't have to think or say anything. Just be an observer. Simply observe the details, the beauty, the wonders of this universe. When you do that, you will realize there is so much joy in this practice. The other practice, which is more suited for religious people and believers, is through focusing on God. All you do is you close your eyes and fill your mind with the idea of God. You don't think about anything else. If anything else occurs in your mind, you get rid of that distraction and come back to the original idea of God. You fill yourself with it, this feeling. You absorb it. That feeling will give you enormous joy. The third is meditation through chanting, and that's another common practice in religious circles. You remember the name of the God, but this time by chanting, speaking in rhythms, repetitions. There's music to it. The idea here is to inscribe the divine in your heart with your tongue. So you chant slowly and continuously. And slowly you will realize you're feeling the wonders of it. So whenever you get time, I hope you'll find some kind of opportunity to practice one or more of these Sufi meditations.